The office of Catherine Vance was a monument to success, a glass-walled cage on the 50th floor where the city below looked like a circuit board of distant, impersonal lights. The desk was a slab of polished obsidian, the chairs were Italian leather, and the air itself seemed filtered of all untidiness, all emotion. It was from this sterile perch that she ruled Vance Innovations, a tech empire she had built from the ashes of a devastating betrayal. Tonight, like most nights, she was the last one here. The only other heartbeat in the vast, silent space belonged to her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, who was curled on a plush sofa, a sketchbook open on her lap, her small face illuminated by the glow of a single desk lamp. Catherine felt a familiar pang of guilt, a feeling as constant as the low hum of the servers one floor below. This was the price. This was the fortress she had built to ensure no one could ever hurt them again. The silence was broken by the soft squeak of a cleaning cart's wheels in the hallway. The night janitor. He was new. She'd seen him from a distance, a tall, broad-shouldered man who moved with a quiet efficiency that was almost invisible. A flicker of her old paranoia, the ghost of her former business partner, an ex-fiancé, Richard, sparked in her gut. Richard had taught her that everyone had an angle, that kindness was a currency for manipulation. She watched the door, her fingers steepled. She needed to know what kind of man this was. An idea, cold and calculating, formed in her mind. A test. She leaned forward, resting her head on her folded arms on the desk, facing away from the door, but angled so she could still see the reflection in the dark glass of the window. She closed her eyes, slowed her breathing, and feigned sleep. The office door opened with a barely audible click. Catherine kept her breathing steady, a practiced stillness she'd perfected in countless brutal negotiations. She heard the gentle rustle of a trash bag being replaced, the soft swish of a cleaning cloth. He was methodical, respectful of the space. She fought the urge to open her eyes. She needed to know more. Through the reflection, she saw him move towards the sofa where Lily was drawing. He paused, his large frame hesitating. Catherine's heart tightened. Lily, unafraid, looked up at him, her blue eyes wide. "You're the night cleaner," she whispered, as if sharing a grand secret. Catherine saw the man's reflection smile, a warm, genuine expression that seemed entirely out of place in her cold office. "That I am," he replied, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "And you're the lead artist, I see." Lily giggled, holding up her sketchbook. "It's a garden. For Mommy. Her plant is sad." She pointed to the corner, where a once lush fiddle-leaf fig stood, its leaves brown and drooping, a botanical mirror of Catherine's own neglected heart. The man, Marcus, she recalled from his ID badge, looked at the plant, then back at Lily. "Well, every garden needs a good gardener. Maybe we can help it feel better." He didn't pry, he didn't overstep. He just met the child on her level. He then moved quietly towards Catherine's desk. She tensed, her entire body a coiled spring. What was he after? A glance at a sensitive document? A peek inside her purse? He did neither. He simply collected the wastebasket. As he turned to leave, he paused, his gaze falling on her feigned sleeping form. Catherine held her breath. This was the moment, the test. In the window's reflection, she saw him look at her, then at the picture of Lily on her desk, then back at her. A look of profound, almost sorrowful empathy crossed his face. He leaned in, not to touch her, but just enough to be near. Catherine froze, every nerve ending screaming, as he whispered so softly she barely heard it. "Don't worry, little artist. Even the busiest people deserve a garden. She's just forgotten where to find the sun." With that, he straightened up and wheeled his cart silently out of the room, leaving Catherine Vance utterly, completely stunned. For a long minute, Catherine didn't move. His words echoed in the silent office, not as an accusation, but as a quiet, startlingly accurate diagnosis. She's just forgotten where to find the sun. It was the truest thing anyone had said about her in years. She slowly lifted her head, her charade forgotten. The calculated chill she wore as armor felt brittle, useless. She looked at Lily, who was now carefully drawing a bright yellow sun in the corner of her garden picture. "Mommy?" Lily asked. "Was that man a gardener?" Catherine managed a small smile. "Something like that, sweetie." She stood up and walked to the door, peering into the empty hallway. On an impulse she didn't fully understand, she stepped out. She found him at the end of the hall, wiping down the elevator buttons. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice sounded foreign, softer than the clipped, authoritative tone she used with her employees. Marcus turned, his expression calm, not surprised or flustered to see the CEO in the hallway at 10 p.m. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice as gentle as it had been with Lily. "I hope I didn't disturb you." "No, not at all," she said, feeling strangely awkward. I wanted to thank you for being so kind to my daughter." He gave a slight nod, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "She's a wonderful kid, bright." "She worries about that plant," Catherine said, gesturing back towards her office. It felt like a foolish thing to say, but it was all she could think of. Most plants just need a little attention, the right light, a bit of water. People aren't so different. His simple wisdom was disarming. "You have children?" she asked. His smile faded slightly, replaced by a deep, quiet warmth tinged with melancholy. "A son. Michael? He's 8. Is he why you work this shift?" The question was more personal than she intended, but she felt compelled to understand the man who had seen through her so effortlessly. He paused, his gaze distant for a moment. "His mom, she passed a few years ago. Michael has asthma, pretty severe, daycare air filters, school dust. It's all a risk. The night shift lets me be there. I can take him to school, pick him up, make sure he's okay. This job, it's clean, it's quiet. It lets me be the dad he needs." The confession was delivered without a trace of self-pity. It was a simple statement of fact, a sacrifice made out of love, and it struck Catherine with the force of a physical blow. She, who paid for the best nannies and the most exclusive schools, was still a ghost in her child's life. This man, who cleaned her floors, was a constant, steady son for his son. That night marked a tectonic shift in Catherine's life. Her late nights at the office, once a symbol of her relentless drive and deep-seated paranoia, transformed into something else entirely. They became an oasis. She would finish her essential work by 7, then spend the next few hours simply being present with Lily, reading books on the sofa or watching her draw. And then, like clockwork, she would hear the soft squeak of the cleaning cart. Their conversations started small. He'd ask about Lily. She'd ask about Michael. She learned that Michael loved astronomy and could name every moon of Jupiter. He learned that Lily was fiercely intelligent, but painfully shy. One evening, Marcus arrived with a small bag of potting soil and a watering can. He didn't ask for permission. He just walked over to the neglected fiddle-leaf fig. "Mind if I try?" he asked, already gently examining a brittle leaf. Catherine found herself nodding, unable to articulate the strange knot of hope in her chest. While Lily watched, captivated, Marcus carefully repotted the plant, trimming the dead leaves and explaining to the little girl how the roots needed room to breathe, just like people. "Sometimes," he said, his large, capable hands working the soil, "things just get stuck in a pot that's too small for them. They can't grow." Catherine felt the words resonate deep within her. Her own life, for all its material largesse, was a pot that had become too small, constricting her heart. The sterile office began to change. A vibrant drawing of a garden, complete with a smiling sun, was now taped to the wall. The fiddle-leaf fig, under Marcus's patient care, began to sprout a few tentative green leaves. The space, once a monument to her isolation, started to feel like a sanctuary. Their talks deepened. He spoke of his wife, of the simple, profound love they had shared. He never framed it as a tragedy, but as a gift he'd been lucky to have. His perspective was so fundamentally different from her own. He saw wealth in moments, in health, in the time he had with his son. Catherine, who could quantify her wealth down to the last decimal point, felt an unnerving sense of poverty in his presence. One rainy Tuesday, she found herself telling him about her own parents, about a childhood spent chasing their conditional approval, where love was a reward for achievement. "I never learned how to just be," she admitted, the confession leaving her feeling raw and exposed. Marcus simply listened, his presence a comforting anchor in the storm of her past. He didn't offer cheap platitudes or easy solutions. He just nodded and said, "It's hard to learn a new language when you're an adult, but not impossible." The routine became the bedrock of her week. The quiet hum of the city, Lily's soft breathing as she dozed on the sofa, and the low, steady rumble of Marcus's voice. In the grand, empty skyscraper, surrounded by the trappings of her success, Catherine Vance was finally, for the first time in years, learning what it felt like not to be alone. The trust Marcus had so freely given her began to unlock doors inside Catherine she thought were welded shut. The story of her betrayal, a wound she had never shown to anyone, began to surface. One evening, after Lily was fast asleep, she found herself telling him about Richard Sterling. "He wasn't just my fiancé," she began, her voice tight with the memory. "He was my partner. We built the company's foundational code together in a tiny garage apartment. I thought we were a team, building a future." Marcus stopped polishing the glass of her office wall, giving her his full attention. His silence was an invitation. "He saw the potential before I did," she continued. "The massive global potential. I was focused on the innovation, the beauty of the code. He was focused on the valuation." She traced a pattern on her obsidian desk. "The day before we were set to present to our first major investors, he locked me out of the system. He filed patents for all of our work under his name alone. He told the investors I was just an unstable, ambitious girlfriend who couldn't handle the pressure. He used my passion, my trust, and he twisted it into a weapon against me. The shame of it still burned. I lost everything. It took me 2 years of legal battles just to get the rights to my own source code. I had to start over from scratch. That's when I built this," she said, gesturing around the office. "Vance Innovations. I built it to be impenetrable. I built it so no one could ever do that to me again." Marcus looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, unwavering empathy. "He didn't just steal your company," he said softly. "He stole your faith in people." Tears pricked Catherine's eyes. "I never let anyone get close enough to try again." Just as the moment of vulnerability settled between them, her phone buzzed with an aggressive urgency, an alert from her board of directors. She glanced at the screen, and the blood drained from her face. It was a hostile takeover bid. The company making the offer was Sterling Enterprises. Richard was back. He wasn't just a ghost from her past anymore. He was a clear and present danger, a predator at the gates of the fortress she had so carefully constructed. The old, familiar ice began to creep back into her veins. The fight was on. The following week was a blur of emergency board meetings, frantic calls with lawyers, and sleepless nights spent dissecting financial reports. The Catherine who joked with Lily and talked quietly with Marcus was gone, replaced by the hardened CEO who had clawed her way to the top. She was cold, efficient, and utterly ruthless. Richard had requested a face-to-face meeting, a power play. She agreed to host it on her turf, in her boardroom, a sterile arena of glass and steel where she felt most in control. He walked in looking exactly as she remembered, impeccably tailored suit, a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes, and an aura of supreme, unearned confidence. "Catherine," he said, his voice smooth as venom, "you've done well for yourself. This is all very impressive. A bit lonely, perhaps?" He gestured at the sprawling, empty office space. She ignored the jab. "What do you want, Richard?" "It's a generous offer," he said, sliding a portfolio across the table. "A merger. We combine our assets. We could be unstoppable, just like we always planned." "You planned," she corrected, her voice like ice. "I'm not interested." He chuckled. "Oh, I think you will be. You see, I've been following your career. You're a fighter, but fighters get tired, and they have weaknesses." His eyes flickered towards the picture of Lily on her credenza. A cold dread washed over her. "Don't you bring my daughter into this." "Of course not," he said with mock sincerity. "I'm talking about your new associations." The door to the boardroom opened, and Marcus entered, pushing his cart. He nodded politely, his eyes briefly meeting Catherine's before he began his work, oblivious to the tension in the room. Richard watched him with a predatory smirk. "Really, Catherine? The janitor?" he sneered, his voice dripping with classist disdain. "A little late for a crisis of conscience, isn't it? Trying to connect with the common man? The board might find that distracting. They might wonder if your judgment has become compromised by sentimentality." Marcus paused his work, his back stiffening. Catherine felt a surge of protective fury so intense it stole her breath. It wasn't just an insult to Marcus. It was an assault on the one pure, good thing that had entered her life. "Get out," she said, her voice dangerously low. Richard stood, his smile widening. "The offer stands, but it expires Friday, and if you refuse, I'll make sure every investor, every board member knows just how unfocused you've become. They'll see you as a liability." He walked out, leaving the threat hanging in the air like poison. Richard's threat was not idle. By the next morning, the whispers had begun. Anonymous emails were sent to board members questioning Catherine's late nights at the office. A financial blogger, known for being Richard's mouthpiece, published a thinly veiled article about CEOs who lose their edge, distracted by inappropriate workplace dalliances. It was a classic Sterling attack, insidious, personal, and designed to create maximum doubt. He was poisoning the well, turning her own success and the fortress she'd built into a prison. The pressure was immense. Her lawyers advised a settlement. Her PR team urged her to issue a cold, corporate denial and publicly distance herself from Marcus. "We need to present a united, powerful front," her lead counsel, a man named Henderson, had argued. "That means eliminating any perceived weakness. The janitor is a perceived weakness." The word hung in the air. Eliminate. It was the language of her old life, the ruthless calculus of survival. She could fight Richard on his own terms. She had the ammunition. She knew where his skeletons were buried, the dirty deals he'd made, the corners he'd cut. She could leak it all, destroy his reputation as thoroughly as he was trying to destroy hers. It would be mutually assured destruction, a scorched earth battle that would leave both companies in ruins. But she would win. That's what the old Catherine would have done. But as she sat in her office that night, the city lights mocking her with their cold brilliance, she saw Marcus's face in her mind. She heard his quiet words about gardens and sunlight. She thought of the gentle way he'd repotted her dying plant, the patience and care in his hands. To fight Richard his way would mean becoming him again. It would mean taking the fledgling hope that had begun to grow in her heart and crushing it under the heel of ambition and revenge. It would mean proving him right, that she was, at her core, just as cold and calculating as he was. The ultimatum was clear, though Richard had never spoken it aloud. Choose. Choose the company, the power, the fortress. Or choose the man who taught you how to feel again. Choose the sun, or choose the cage. By the time she heard the familiar squeak of the cleaning cart in the hall, she felt the crushing weight of that choice settle upon her. He walked in, his expression etched with concern. He knew. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "He's using you against me." Marcus looked at her, his gaze steady. "I'm not a weakness, Catherine, and neither is caring about people. It's a strength. It's your strength. You've just forgotten how to use it." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension. Richard was there, flanked by his lawyers, looking smug and victorious. He had laid his trap perfectly. Catherine entered alone. She looked poised, her expression unreadable. She took her place at the head of the table, not looking at Richard, but meeting the eyes of each board member, one by one. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and clear. "Mr. Sterling has made an offer to acquire Vance Innovations. He has also made it clear that if we refuse, he intends to destabilize this company through a campaign of innuendo and personal attacks." Richard smirked. "It's just business, Catherine." "No," she said, turning to face him directly. The fire in her eyes was not the cold fire of revenge, but the warm, brilliant light of conviction. "It's not. I know how to play your game, Richard. I have a dossier on my desk detailing every dirty secret, every back-alley deal you've ever made. I could release it right now, and your career would be over by lunch." The color drained from Richard's face. The board members shifted uncomfortably. This was the move they expected, the killing blow. But Catherine didn't move. She took a deep breath. "But I'm not going to do that, because that's your world, a world built on fear, on tearing others down to build yourself up. And I am done living in that world." She turned back to the board. "For the past 7 years, I have run this company with a single-minded focus on profit and defensibility. I built walls, and it made us successful, but it also made us hollow." "What is the meaning of this?" one of the older board members demanded. The meaning, Catherine said, her voice ringing with passion, is that we are changing our definition of success. Effective immediately, I am announcing a new corporate initiative, a profit-sharing plan for every single employee, from our senior engineers to our custodial staff. We are establishing a child care subsidy and offering fully funded educational grants. We are going to invest in our people, not just our patents. A murmur went through the room. Richard laughed out loud. You've lost your mind. The shareholders will revolt. You're committing corporate suicide. No, Catherine said, her gaze unwavering. I'm building a garden, a place where people can grow. That is my vision for this company. A company built on integrity, not intimidation, on community, not conquest. That is the company I want to lead. She placed a single file on the table. This is my formal rejection of Mr. Sterling's offer. It is also my proposal for the company's future. You can vote for his world of threats and shadows, or you can vote for mine. The choice is yours. She stood there, vulnerable but powerful, having sacrificed her greatest weapon, revenge, for a principle. The silence that followed Catherine's speech was absolute. The board members looked from Richard's stunned, apoplectic face to Catherine's calm, resolute one. They had come expecting a bloodbath, a corporate war. Instead, they had witnessed a declaration of independence. It was Eleanor Vance, Catherine's aunt, and the board's most tenured member, who broke the silence. She had always been a stern, pragmatic voice, a believer in the bottom line. Richard, she said, her voice cutting through the tension, I have been on this board since its inception. I watched Catherine build this company from nothing after you tried to destroy her. Her proposal is unorthodox, but her integrity is unquestionable. Yours, on the other hand, has just been publicly exposed as entirely conditional. She turned to the rest of the board. All those in favor of rejecting Sterling's offer and exploring Ms. Vance's proposed new direction, say aye. A chorus of ayes filled the room, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. It was nearly unanimous. Richard Sterling sat, defeated, not by a corporate maneuver, but by a simple, powerful act of moral courage. He gathered his papers and stormed out of the room without another word, his empire of shadows having crumbled in the light. Later that day, Catherine stood in her office, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The weight of the last 7 years felt as if it had finally lifted. The door opened softly. It was Marcus. He held 2 cups of coffee. He didn't say, I knew you could do it, or congratulations. He just handed her a cup and stood beside her, watching the sky. That plant of yours, he said after a long, comfortable silence, it has a new leaf coming in, a big one. Catherine looked over at the fiddle leaf fig. In the center of the plant, a bright green, tightly furled leaf was pointing towards the ceiling, a symbol of new life. She smiled, a real unburdened smile. I had a good teacher. You were always a gardener, Catherine, he said, his voice warm. You just needed to remember. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the gesture feeling as natural and right as breathing. The fortress had fallen, and in its place, something far more beautiful was beginning to grow. 6 months later, the view from Catherine's office was the same, but everything else had changed. The obsidian desk was often cluttered with Lily's art supplies. The fiddle leaf fig was now lush and thriving, reaching for the sunlight that streamed through the glass. Vance Innovations, against all market predictions, was flourishing. Employee morale was at an all-time high, and their new reputation for ethical innovation had attracted a wave of brilliant, passionate new talent. But Catherine wasn't in her office. It was a Saturday. She was kneeling in the rich, dark soil of a community garden plot, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. Beside her, Lily was carefully watering a row of burgeoning tomato plants. A few feet away, Marcus was showing his son, Michael, how to build a trellis for a climbing beanstalk. The laughter of the 2 children mingled in the warm afternoon air. Marcus caught her eye and smiled that same genuine smile that had unsettled her all those months ago. It no longer unsettled her. It felt like coming home. He walked over and knelt beside her, his hand gently covering hers in the soil. She looked at their joined hands, then at the life teeming around them, the children, the plants, the sun on their faces. She had spent so long measuring her life in stock prices and square footage, only to discover that true wealth was measured in moments like this. It was the quiet, steady presence of a good man, the sound of her daughter's laughter, and the simple, profound joy of helping